always waiting for that phone call, you know. What is telling you that? Okay, good. We are looking good here. Mm-mm.
That's perfect. Yeah, that sounds about right. Oh, good. So you're a veteran now of doing that. Yes. Okay, guys, we're going to get started. If y'all want to come on in and make your way in and find the most comfortable seat that's still available, we'll get started. We're going to be looking at Mark chapter 8 today, and I'm hoping to have some good discussion on this, and we're going to interject a little bit of counseling discussion in with Mark chapter 8. I think it fits. We'll see whether you agree with that or not. And I really am, as always, very eager to hear your thoughts. I have lots of questions still lingering about some of the things in chapter 8 and all of Mark, but I have questions that I've posed that I will attempt to answer, but I want to hear your answers, and I'm not predisposed to believe mine are correct and yours would not be as good or better. So I really do want to hear your thoughts. If you would, let's have a prayer and we'll get started. Father, we want to thank you for this day. Father, we thank you for the beauty of the day, for the amazing way that you work through the seasons, through the days, through the weeks, how you give us structure, and how many things we take for granted. We're just really in awe of how good you are to us, the multiple ways that you take care of us every day that we just allow ourselves to be blind to. And Father, we're mindful of the questions that Jesus asked of his disciples and his followers so regularly about having ears and having eyes. And we confess that so often we just don't hear and don't see. And we ask your guidance and your help. Please help us to see better and to hear better and to see those things that are truly from you and the things that are important. I pray, Father, that you'll help us to develop the ability to see better, that you'll give us wisdom, and that you will make us messengers to those around us, and that we may be an influence for good. So I pray in Christ's name, amen. Here, and I've asked Doug if he would. I'm going to mention verse 21 first, and we're going to come back and we're going to read this chapter. I've been asking Doug to read all the way through so that we've at least heard all the scriptures, and I'm trusting that most of you are reading this during the week. I know some of you are studying diligently during the week, and Tim is good about sharing with different people that are doing leading groups and other things, some of his thoughts and his questions during the week. And so I know a lot of you are doing that, and I appreciate it. But I want to draw your attention to verse 21, chapter 8, Mark chapter 8, verse 21. And so Jesus says to his disciples, "How is it you do not understand?" And I want us to think about that a little bit. I want to think about it as we get started, but we're going to focus on it a little more when we get down into that part of the chapter. How is it that you do not understand? And just that phrase, before we read these first few verses, Doug's going to read 1 through 10 in just a minute. Well, what does that mean to you? When Jesus asked them, "How do you not understand?" What's he really saying? In today's terminology, what would you be saying to your brother or your spouse or your coworker if you just said, "Do you not understand?" What's the implied message? You're not listening. Who said you dummy? Thank you, because that's really what we're in a church building. We're afraid to say that, but that's really what's being implied there, isn't it? Are you just without the ability to think? What's wrong with you? Okay, let's read 1 through 10, Doug, if you would, please.
All right, and this is out of the NIV version.
Perfect.
Mark chapter 8, starting at verse 1. During those days, another large crowd gathered, since they had nothing to eat. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance." His disciples answered, "But where in this remote place can we get enough bread to feed them?" "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When they had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. Boy, sorry, I just really
Yes.
butchered that.
Dalmanutha, the land of spotted dogs. I think that's what that is. I'm not completely sure about that, but we're going to go with that. So this is a story of Jesus feeding a bunch of people with a little bit of bread and a few fish. Again, didn't we just hear this story? Why do you think, viewing the fact that Bible real estate is precious, and we're told that Many other signs and wonders were done. More than all the volumes of the world couldn't hold all the signs and wonders that were done. But we have two stories of him feeding 5,000 and then 4,000. In the amount of bread and fish to begin with and the amount taken up is not exactly the same, and the number of people is not exactly the same. But this is in essence the same story, right? I mean, is that what you see? Why? Why is this story in here twice with a fair amount of detail? Okay, for the Gentiles, being presented for the Gentiles? Okay. Okay. Done once among the Jews, once among the Gentiles. That's a good observation. Seen through different people. And see, but now those are good reasons why it would be done more than one time. But why do we have it recorded? Okay, it is. It has to be. It wouldn't be there if it wasn't. There's a message in there that's important. I don't know if we've pulled that message out yet. Thank you for that. Thank you. I wish every one of these verses we had voice inflection just like that. That would help so much. If I could hear the voice inflection of Jesus when he's talking to them, I would pay good money to have that added to the Bible. That's thank you. And yes, that whiny voice of how do we do this? I think that's an excellent point and a big part of probably why this is in here twice. Because it gave the disciples the opportunity to do what? Demonstrate that they had learned from the first time. When he said, don't you understand? Don't you have enough faith? I can just take this little bit of bread and make enough and we have scraps left over. He gave them that object lesson. Then he presented, here's another occasion. It's almost, the details are almost identical. And what did the disciples say? What did they say? How are we going to do this? We're in a remote place. And in fact, Jesus kind of said that. In fact, he helps them with that part. I don't think in the first story it mentioned that he had compassion on them. He seems, I think if we had all the voice inflection, he seemed a little more bothered the first time. But this time he has compassion and he says, we've been walking 3 days. Now, what does that infer, by the way? It doesn't say it very plainly. These people have been following me 3 days. I think, other than what they might have stuffed in their pockets, they hadn't had anything to eat for 3 days.
How about trust?
Trust? What about trust?
Well, I think that's an important part of it.
Yes. And I think he wanted the disciples to have that trust and faith, and he wanted them to demonstrate that they had learned that he could take care of that and he would take care of that. But again, they failed to do that, and we'll see that again when they launch out in the boat and have another conversation. So it was an opportunity for him to show his compassion, to show his leadership, but I think maybe, I don't know if this is right, maybe the greatest purpose was to give the disciples the opportunity to demonstrate they had learned. So what is that? Those of you who've had leadership training, what's going on there? What's Jesus doing for them? Teaching them, he's telling them, he's showing them, he's getting them involved. Then the situation comes up again, he's testing them to see if did you hear what I said? Did you see what I did? Are you at least on board with the direction this is going to go? And they really didn't do that well. But I think maybe the opportunity for them to do that is, and this is going to play into what we're going to talk about in a little while about what we think and understand, how important that is to how we act and who we are. Okay, other comments on that section, we're going to move on kind of quickly, I think. Doug, if you would, 11 through 21.
Yes, sir. Starting here at verse 11. Excuse me, Roxy. Let me hit
Okay.
a button there.
Yeah,
okay.
sure.
Great. I'll make sure our online viewers get that too.
Okay.
Okay, in verse 11, the Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it." Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. "Be careful," Jesus warned them. "Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod." They discussed this with one another and said, "It is because we have no bread." Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, "Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" 12, they replied. "And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" They answered, 7. He said to them, "Do you still not understand?" Sorry for the voice inflections there.
No, that's good. That's perfect. Okay. And see that, and I think we can reasonably apply the voice inflections because Jesus, his words indicate some of that, and he's questioning them pretty hard. Do you still not understand? Still, after all this time? And so this is when they're in the boat. They've now had this object lesson twice about the bread. And so when he's talking about the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod, they're reverting back to, it's because we don't have enough bread. And he's like, "Are you still hung up on that? Y'all, I'm just going to say it. Y'all are afraid to say it because we're here in the church building, but I think he's implying, are you just stupid? What's wrong with you?" Now, I know that word is awful, and parents today are teaching their children that's almost like profanity. And there are better words, foolish, unwise, but they don't have the punch. And I think if we could get the real voice inflection of Jesus here, I think he's pretty put out at this point. Let's back up just a little bit to the Pharisees asking for a sign. This is kind of a weird little 2 or 3 verses here. Let me just ask this. Why do you think the Pharisees sought a sign? Or what kind of sign do you think they were looking for? They're testing him. And they've seen him, either seen or heard about, this example of the taking a little bit of bread and fish and feeding thousands of people. He's done that several times. Other examples of people being healed. No doubt some of the Pharisees have witnessed some of that themselves because they're going to be there. If there's thousands of people for a religious gathering, the religious leaders are going to at least come stand by the back door like this and watch what's going on. So some of them have seen some of this, and all of them probably have heard these stories. So they're not really looking for a sign to see if he has the ability to do supernatural things. I think they already know that. Right? Is that your thinking? Y'all correct me if I'm off base. Yes, ma'am, Charlotte.
I wonder if it's like an audience watching a magician. Do it one more time. And I'm gonna
Yes. I think that's an excellent observation. Charlotte says maybe it's like an audience watching a magician, and they say, "Do that one more time, and I can get that trick. I know you're pulling a fast one, but you keep doing it, and we'll figure out what the catch is." And that's a good observation. Yes, sir.
I think it's like children and all of us that go by the ice cream store, stop by ice cream, go by again, people don't stop by ice cream.
Yeah.
So we're all
Yeah. So for those at home, Paul's saying that these people are probably like us, and like any kid you get ice cream once, you want ice cream every day, and adults are that same way. I know I am. I want ice cream every day. And in fact, I want some now that you brought it up. It's a little early in the day, but yes, I think all of those things. But they were looking for, and I think this is the same as what you're saying, basically, you know, one of the big news items now is photo ID. Do you need a photo ID to vote, voter ID? And they were looking for positive identification. They want Jesus to give them something that positively proves who he is. And in our eyes and our minds, and let's don't forget now, we have the advantage of having all this written down in an orderly fashion, so we can see some things they couldn't see at that time from isolated viewpoints. So to us, it seems like, well, you've had a plenty of demonstration that Jesus is the Son of God. He has power that other people don't have. But I think some of it, to be fair to them, I think they are looking for additional signs, for additional proof, because they just can't believe it. They can't believe because this doesn't fit their belief of what the Messiah was going to be. He's not anything like what they were expecting. And so they just can't accept this is really him. This is the one we've been prophesying about. So back into the time when they get in the boat and they head out, and Jesus says to them, to his disciples, he warns them about what? Yeast. Yeast or leaven, depending on what version you have. Yeast or leaven of what? Pharisees and Herod. Okay, that's an odd mixture. So what does that mean in today's layman terms? What's he warning them about that has to do with the Pharisees and Herod? What do the Pharisees represent? What does Herod represent? Oh. Yes, a false understanding of the role of the Messiah and a false understanding, a faulty worldview. They have a faulty worldview, and their belief in their worldview is as it has been, and they have reinforced their belief, and it's an entrenched belief. Herod believes in a socio-political worldview that has him and his family at the top, and that's the way it's supposed to be, and they will suppress anybody that fights at it, and no doubt he firmly believes that it's the right thing to do, suppress, even kill somebody that would challenge his authority. That's part of his worldview. The worldview of the Pharisees is what in general? It's a religious worldview, so it is more like our worldview. It is a worldview that there is a God and there's a plan for us, but it's a faulty religious worldview in the ways that have been said already, that they were expecting a different kind of Messiah. What else about their religious worldview just wasn't quite aligned with the reality?
Roxy, it's an oral tradition that was established by what they call the elders and the Pharisees, that was supplemental to what God had instituted, and they, as humans will do that, they will build upon that and make it more exacting and enforce that on other people, and so there's a certain amount of power that comes along with that and control, and that's kind of, I think, what Jesus is cautioning about. Don't rely on these things that didn't come from God in the first place. These are things that mankind typically does, and be very careful about this.
Yes, and so it's the world of ideologies and the world of ideas and the world of what you believe. And again, the terminology, and this is a counseling terminology, but it's a very real world operating belief. All of us have operating beliefs. You have things that you believe that were largely shaped by your family of origin, but you've made some adjustments to those beliefs as you've gone through life based on people you've worked with, people that your new family system, circumstances, things that have happened to you. You've altered So things that are popular today, things that are controversial today, what you believe about race and race relations, what you believe about politics, what you believe about the love between a husband and a wife, what you believe about sexual purity, what you believe about church, what you believe about Jesus and God. All those things, you have a set of operating beliefs about all those things and thousands of other things. And none of us have operating beliefs that are perfectly aligned with God's viewpoint. None of us do. None of us have our operating beliefs perfectly aligned with reality, and God's perspective is the reality. But we've always viewed the world through our very limited ability. Well, he warns about Herod. What about the children of Herod? What about the people that work in his court? What about the people that are his close advisors? Should you be careful about them too? Well, yes, because they're going to basically believe what Herod believes, or 80% or some percentage of what he believes, they're going to believe. Well, what about the people? What about the first cousin of the person that works in Herod's court? Do you see how this works? What about the Pharisees? Well, you don't have to necessarily just be a scholarly person who has studied for years and years and be considered a Pharisee or a scribe or a priest. You might be a family member or once removed or just somebody who's sat at the feet at. You may be spreading these false ideas as well. Well, how does that apply to us today? Is there anybody in here that ever has an association with somebody who has some faulty operating beliefs that has a chance of rubbing off on you? I'm going to wait. All of you got to raise your hand. I'm waiting. It's true of all of us. And it's in so many parts of life. And some of it is about things that don't matter that much. Some of it is about incredibly important things. And then the blend between there, things that don't matter very much, that adds up over time. I'm going to take just a minute to tell you a personal story. I'll try to keep this short. It's not about me, but this is about each one of you. Most of you know Doug's a runner, a marathoner, and I've done a good bit of running over the years. And I don't know how many times I've walked in this building. And once people associate you with that, the people who don't do that, what do you think they come up to you and say? Why are you doing that? You're ruining your knees. You're gonna pay for that. I used to do that. Now my knees are bad and my ankle's bad, hips bad. I've heard that something over 1,000 times. I don't know how many times. As I'm saying this, the names of people at church that constantly come up and say those things. Yeah, I had an injury in football and I can't run anymore, and you're going to have it too. Well, now I've got a knee brace on my left knee. And so for years, I had the ability to just sort of dismiss, because I'd studied enough anatomy and I'd been around enough people, including people who had run into their 60s and 70s and beyond, and people who were still doing amazing things in their older years. And so I knew that couldn't be true. That can't be true, that automatically if you do this a lot for a long time, it's going to wear out your joints. Well, this past week, as I went to Birmingham to talk to someone to figure out what's going on with my knee, she took x-rays and she showed me the x-rays. And y'all, this did me so much good. She said, look at the space between the bones on you've got excellent joints. Your joints are in good shape. She said, it's probably because of the exercise that you've gotten and the load-bearing exercise and the things you've done. This looks like the knee of a person half your age. Well, I needed to hear that, not just for the flattery of that moment, but because as I'm having some problems, guess what? Those things I've dismissed for years, I'm hearing those voices and thinking, you know what? Maybe I've overdone it and I'm paying the price now. But I got some assurance from a medical professional that no, your joints don't wear out from overuse. Your joints tend to wear out from lack of use. Muscles and joints our bodies were designed to move and to exercise. And they were not designed to do what most of us do all day now, and that's sit in the chair. And so I share with people frequently that the most dangerous thing at my house, is not the motorcycle in the garage. It's that lounge chair, that recliner in the den. So I share that as that's a personal example that's very real to me. And you have dozens of them where people have shared ideas with you, and it just wears you down after a while. And you start believing it because you've heard it so many times. And y'all, this is how the media operates today. This is how national politics operate. You tell a thing over and over and over enough times and get enough sources to repeat your story, eventually it becomes just an understood truth. Well, everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. That's the thing that we need to warn ourselves about. Okay. Thoughts? Comments? Yes, sir, Todd.
I don't want to touch on what you said going back to what Doug was talking
Okay.
about oral history.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the book of First and Second Kings and Chronicles, they were written hundreds of years after the events began to transpire.
Right.
And if you look at also the book of Ruth, you'll see that it was written after David was born,
Mm-hmm.
and yet events transpired many years prior.
Yeah.
And so these are oral histories that are passed down. Well, they may have been somewhat written down, but they were oral histories that were faithfully passed down.
Right.
But then, and so when people say, well, Jesus didn't write anything, he didn't say anything, well, yeah, but they had the tradition of oral history
Mm-hmm.
that, again, the gospel writers faithfully wrote down. And I think that the Pharisees had, perhaps in their intent originally, may have had a healthy perspective, but over time, oral traditions and the fact that they want to control what they want to control people, they can become twisted.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And even if it's written, I mean, and we're seeing this today. This is one of the hotly debated concepts that are out there now, the rewriting of history. And maybe the rewriting is getting it more accurate. Maybe it's getting it less accurate. I really don't know. But the point is, we are affected by those stories, whether they're orally passed along or written down somewhere or it's on video. You know, we're affected in a powerful way. If I say to you the phrase, "Call me Alabama," who do you think of? Alexander Shannara. Why? Why does his name come to your mind? That's a generic phrase anybody could say. The many times you've seen ads, you've watched a commercial on TV, you've seen the billboards, and you know the memes now. When the billboard shows for rent, people post memes on Facebook. Or anybody seen Alexander Shannara? He's gone missing. There's a billboard. It's not taken because it's so pervasive. Well, you see how effective that is, though. People do that for a reason because it's effective. It's effective in marketing and advertising. Well, all of us are marketing and advertising, whether we realize that or not. We are ambassadors, but some people are ambassadors for Satan, and some people are ambassadors for Christ, and sometimes may not be representing as we think we are. Okay, we're going to read, just a second, we're going to read 27 through 33, but I just want to tie this into the things Jesus says to his disciples in that boat. And he's saying pretty harshly to them, do you still not get it? If you have ears, you should be hearing. If you have eyes, you should be seeing. And he seems greatly troubled, genuinely troubled, that they're not grasping. Because they have operating beliefs. They were expecting a Messiah that's going to set up an earthly kingdom. And we're going to get to the end of this chapter. Okay, spoiler alert. Peter's going to try to correct Jesus and say, no, that's not how this is going to go. You need to not be saying these things. That's not helping us get where we need to go. Peter correcting Jesus because his operating beliefs are so strong. Let's read on, 27 through 33, Doug, please.
Yes, sir. So starting in verse 22. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." And once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." Is that it?
Okay, thank you. And thanks for catching me. I was about to skip that section. So this story of healing the blind man, and to my knowledge, I think this is the only story in the Bible where it seems like Jesus healed in two stages. It seems like the man was partly healed and then completely healed. And that may be accurate, or it may not be. And one possibility is, first of all, does this seem odd to you that Jesus spit on the man's eyes and touched him with his hands? I see some faces. I see faces scrunching up, and some people are covering up like, that's gross. That's really gross. But now, all of you that are mothers, don't act like you've never spit on your fingers and wiped jelly off your kids' faces. Don't act like you've never done that. What if this man has been what we would call legally blind for a long time? What if he was already where he could sort of see people like trees moving about, but he'd been that way so long that gradually he just closed his eyes and he got matted up and got that matter? What if Jesus is wiping that matter off for him to open his eyes to begin with, that demonstrated where he actually was, and then he puts his hands on him in a way that heals him and he can see clearly like he should be able to see? I don't know if that's right or not. That's one belief. But whether it's in two stages or whether he was just clearing the matter from his eyes so he could open and for him to see where he had been, that's a possibility. What are your takes on that? What are your comments? What questions do you have as you read that, Paul?
Sometimes it takes more than two of him to get you to act right.
Yes. Yes. So sometimes you need to be hit in the head twice with the two before to get the message. Yeah. And good point, Paul. And I don't know how much of this is, we've read in previous chapters where it just says that Jesus couldn't do miracles in his home country because of the lack of faith there. And he says to a lot of people, your faith has healed you, including the woman that had the issue of blood that just made her way up and touched the hem of his garments. It was her faith that healed her. Now, clearly it was the power that's in Jesus through God that healed her, but the person's faith has something to do with that, a lot to do with that. So that could be the case that his faith wasn't that strong to begin with, and it was a two-phase healing. I don't know. Other observations? Yes, sir, Steve?
Well, most of the speculating, I often wondered if it could not have been that he opened his eyes spiritually and he was seeing in the spiritual realm, and possibly he opened so much and he closed it back down some.
Okay. So maybe he was seeing too deeply to begin with and had to dial it back some. I hadn't thought about that possibility, but that's interesting. Other comments? Okay, Doug, 27 through 33, please.
Sorry for the delay. It just takes me a while to move out here. Okay, so 27 through 33.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to hit a button here too. There we go. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "What do you say? Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns."
Okay, thank you, Doug. So when Jesus asks, "Who do people say that I am?" He's sort of saying, "What are people thinking of me? What's the current popular opinion of me?" He's not asking like we might ask today, "How many Facebook likes do I have?" He's not asking because he needs to know his level of popularity. He's asking why. What's the purpose of his question of who do people think that I am? I'm going to hesitate to give my answer. Anybody have a thought?
I do, brother,
Yes, sir.
if you don't mind. I think when we read this passage, it's hard to take into consideration all of the factors that need to be considered here.
Right.
One, he's in Caesarea Philippi,
Right.
which is geographically, geopolitically, it's mostly Gentile folks. And there's a lot of other religious practices going on there. So he's in a Gentile area, and he's asking the disciples, "Who do these people say that I am? What is the common understanding? What are they saying?" And so I think it's interesting that the disciples say that they are hearing from the people in this region that people think that you are of a Jewish heritage. You're either a prophet or somebody like that. And so I think that that's an interesting point in this whole thing. But again, I think also this is a pivotal point in all of the Gospels, in Matthew and Mark. This is the point in which the whole frame shifts from Jesus proving who he is to an understanding of who he is.
Right.
And so Peter makes this declaration. In Matthew, it's different. There's this little bit different rendition of this. And you are the Christ, you're the Messiah. And Peter, Jesus saying, "Absolutely, you nailed it, right on. And this was not revealed to you by people, but this was revealed to you by God. And the
Right.
gates of Hades won't prevail." All of that stuff, right?
Right.
So this is like a huge piece. This is a point now. The rest of this gospel is not going to be so much towards Jesus demonstrating who he is so that people would understand, but now what's going to happen to the people who do understand?
Right.
What's the flip here? Anyway,
Thank you. That's very good, and I think that's exactly right. That he's assessing what are the people among these, not only the Gentiles but the Jews. Who do they think I am? And the fact that the reply is John the Baptist or Elijah. Well, it would take a lot of faith to believe that John the Baptist or Elijah had come back from the dead and was doing amazing things. Either of those, that's not a lack of faith. It's just it's an inaccurate and incomplete understanding. And again, Jesus is pulling out, filtering out, revealing faulty operating beliefs and correcting faulty operating beliefs. And it's in this light then that Peter says, "You're the Christ, you're the Messiah." And as Doug said, Jesus says that is spot on. That is a fundamental truth, and it's on this fundamental truth I'm going to build my church. That's a powerful statement. And then just after that, and maybe it's that bragging on Peter that went to his head a little bit, and Jesus goes on to he starts preparing his disciples for the realities. He's going to suffer and die. Well, they don't want to hear that because their paradigm, their operating belief is we're going to set up a kingdom here. The church and the kingdom and the Jewish nation is going to prevail, and we're going to live happily ever after. That's not an accurate operating belief. And Jesus is correcting that to the point that he calls Peter Satan. "Get behind me, Satan." He calls him the devil. Now, who here is going to challenge Jesus and say, that's too strong? You went too far there, Jesus. Does anybody want to take that legal position? I don't want to. How does this apply to us today? Is there a time for us to at least think that, even if we use discretion not to say that to another person, you are a representative of Satan in my life. The things you're saying to me, the beliefs you're presenting to me, what you're drawing me towards, that's a representation of the belief of Satan. You need to get behind me, and I'm moving away from you. I don't want you to have anything to do with me. Should we be cutting people off from our lives and at least in our minds marking people as that this is a troublemaker? This is not somebody I need to be around. You've probably read the expression, you will be 5 years from now the same person you are today, except for the books you read and the people you spend time with. I think that's a fairly accurate statement. We live in a time today that the truth is a lot of people don't read any books. A lot of people read lots of snippets on social media and, a few characters on Twitter. But that's shaping you too, a little bit at a time. I think, sadly, that shapes us. It's easier for us to go one tick at a time in a direction than it is to read a book that presents a grand concept and we either accept or reject that grand concept. Perhaps. Regardless, we are all affected by the people we spend time with, and by the social media, the news media, the books, the newspapers, whatever you read has some effect on who you are, what you believe, what your operating beliefs are. And I dare say everybody in here has probably changed their beliefs about some things in the last 10 years. Hopefully for the better, and that's a good thing, but sadly, largely for the worse. And I see trends, I see Christians that accept a lot of things that 30 years ago would not have been accepted and were clearly then contrary to biblical teaching, and clearly today contrary to biblical teaching, but has just gradually become more and more accepted. Okay, we don't have time to read this last section, but Jesus tells them that you're going to have to take up a cross. It's going to be a long-term burden that you're going to have to bear. Not very appealing. But he's saying if you give up your natural life and your natural way of seeking after the things that make you happy, if you will forego that for a life of pursuing Jesus, you will receive a life that is abundant. And there's a powerful message in that. So, all that to say, let's guard our operating beliefs. Let's be willing to challenge our operating beliefs. Let's don't guard them in the sense that I'm going to hang on to it. I'll never change it no matter what's presented to me. Let's look for truth and look for places where I might need to change what I believe. And look, what you believe is going to affect what you do and who you are. That's absolutely the truth. So, we need to be very, very careful about what we allow ourselves to believe. Let's have a prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father, we thank you again for this time together. Thank you for the comments that have been made and for the thoughts. I pray, Father, that you will work through your Spirit to move the thoughts of the people here, that we'll continue to develop and ask questions and be the people that we should be, and that we'll think as you'd have us to think and act as you'd have us to act. So I pray in Christ's name, amen. Thank you so much.